Welcome back to the show, Business Mastery for Startups, Scaleups, and Early Stage Businesses, with your host, Jerry Gadori. That's me. And today, our special guest is nobody. I took a break from the interviews for what will likely be a very quick but very important episode. Over the last month or so, I've noticed a couple of elements coming up again and again and again that I really think is, for whatever reason, sliding under the radar of most founders, early startup leaders, and small business operators. These three things are things that, frankly, I would have liked to have known earlier in my career, but things that can easily sink a startup. You know, there's that statistic we hear all the time, 93% of all startups fail within the first 5 years, and that's a very real number. But I feel pretty strongly that while the lists that get made up all the time are usually ran out of money, bad product market fit, wrong team, wrong people, etc., I feel like these three things are more fundamental even than those and are a big percentage of that number overall. Now, before we dig into this, I need you to understand something. These are my views. These are things that I've seen. I've been doing this for almost 30 years. I've worked with literally hundreds of companies. I've been in the startup scene for more than a decade of that 30 years. And I've talked to so many people, and I've seen these things again and again. But for clarity, these things are my lived experience. If you've experienced something else, then by all means, keep that in mind, which, by the way, we're going to circle back to here in the second one. But let's start this the way we should with the first one and say this. As unsexy as this is even to mention, as un-LinkedIn cool quote as you can get, the number one thing I implore every early stage leader, every startup founder, every small business operator is this: learn the basics. In all my years consulting, this was the thing that came up the most often that people wanted to focus on the least because it's not exciting. But as a founder, you want a basic line knowledge of all of the things in basic business, and then added to that whatever niche that you're in. So what are business basics? Accounting, operations, sales, marketing, human resources. Again, just the basics. There's a wonderful book called Who Not How that a few of my friends have gotten me to read. One of them is Brandy Larkin. Another is Brian Smith. And Brian, you might remember from a few episodes ago. And it's a great book. I agree with the premise of the book, which is that you should focus on your secret sauce and find people whose secret sauce are the things that you need for your company and hire them. I completely agree. But, we all know in the beginning we don't have that kind of money. We all know that if it doesn't get done by us, or at least supervised by us, it doesn't happen. And when the time comes to engage with those folks, having a baseline understanding of that knowledge will allow you to do a better job recruiting and a better job managing those resources, those assets, those folks. So, you know, it's one of my principles as destination employer to utilize the EFG leadership framework. And that's a heck of a lot easier to do if you at least understand the space that employee, that teammate is working in. But understanding the fundamentals of business, I can't prove this empirically, but I will go argue and debate with anyone who wants to say that that's not the number one thing that causes people to go out of business. You know, again, you see those lists with topics like ran out of money. Well, why did they run out of money? Is it that they didn't understand their business operations enough to make wise choices? Is it that they didn't understand their accounting well enough to understand the differences between revenue, gross profit, and spendable cash? These basics, these fundamentals are key. So again, the number one thing I'm going to ask you folks to make sure, ideally before you start your business, but at the very least as you're starting your business, is to learn the fundamentals, learn the basics. What happens in every professional sports team when they change the coach? That coach comes in and what do? They look at the fundamentals. They make sure that that team knows how to do the baseline of things before they expand that out to look at the areas beyond that. So number one, learn your basics. Number two, kind of teased it at the beginning, and that's this. Not all advice is equal. Now, it goes without saying, if you spent more than 15 minutes on LinkedIn, it's easy to discern that some of that advice is just bad. I think very little of it is in bad spirit. I think very little of it is folks looking to mislead, but some of it is objectively bad advice. I belong to a couple of different business communities. I speak at startup conferences and I attend those types of things. And I hear some advice that's objectively bad advice. Now, if you've taken the first step we talked about and gotten a basic understanding of all the aspects of your business, it will be easier to discern some of this. But I'm going to set that aside because, again, that's typically pretty easy to discern. There's a couple of others that are sneaky and deceptive, not because the person sharing it is trying to be, quite the opposite, because they are earnest, they are sincere, and for you, they are wrong. Here's some examples. The same advice that your founder friend who's started and exited 2 companies is currently on their 3rd company, and 3 years into that, the advice that they give you as to how you should handle your startup might be wrong, not because they're bad people, not because they wish you ill, but because their mind is where their company is in its stage. What's good for Google might be bad for a startup. The company's stage is a very relevant piece that's often not thought of when advice is given. So if you're a very early stage company, you're pre-revenue, you're trying to get your first $10,000 a month, you're in that zone and somebody's giving you advice that's running a $5 million company, has 15 employees, again, that advice might be very good for them and very good for their business stage, but bad for you. So be mindful of that. The second piece of advice is niche related. What's good for a plumbing company in Ohio might be bad for a tech startup in San Francisco, might be bad for a B&B on Cape Cod. Okay? Your niche, whether your product, whether your service, whether your technology, in the technology space, what sub-niche that you're in, can make or break advice and its relevance to you. If you're running a software product startup, the things that you do to operate will be fundamentally different in some areas than a technology services company, which will be different than a fitness product company like our friend Tristan from a few weeks ago is starting, or has started rather. So make sure that the advice you're getting is relevant to your niche. Another place where you have to be wary of advice, and this is coming from a consultant and coming from someone who's a startup advisor and coming from someone who sells consulting services, is to be aware of the giver of the advice. At its most positive, that person giving that advice may well be looking at it through the lens of their specialty. So when they're telling you to prioritize X, it's because in their world, in the service they provide, that's most important. That doesn't make them liars, but it could very well make them wrong as it relates to you. So be mindful of that advice. In that same vein, if people are telling you that this is an easy way and that this is a hack and that this will be no effort, no money, they are selling you something. Okay? Those folks, there's no easy button here. This isn't Staples in the 2000s with their awesome ad campaign. The biggest hack I can give you, there is no hack. Get back to work. Is there a right way to do things that will be easier? Absolutely yes. But easier and easy are not the same animals. So if somebody's giving you an offer that seems a little too good to be true, probably it is. Okay? Do your due diligence. do your homework. So number two, not all advice is equal. Again, I'm purposely excluding the actual bad advice, somebody lying to you. I'm talking about people who are coming to you with good intent, but offering you advice that's bad for you and where you're at in the business you're in. I'd like to add one other small piece of that too, though, because I guess this is worth mentioning here. And that's this. Everybody's got advice. You can talk to anybody about anything, and I can virtually guarantee you that you're going to get advice on it, regardless of their experience and background. Now, I mentioned niche is relevant earlier. That doesn't mean that advice coming from a niche is necessarily bad. You just have to think it through, to the natural conclusion of that advice and ask yourself how it applies or doesn't. But that still implies that that person has experienced what they're talking about. So when people give you advice, ask yourself, has this person ever done anything like this before? As I mentioned, I spend a lot of time in business associations, and a lot of advice is given. And sometimes when I'm listening to that advice, it becomes clear to me that the person giving it means well, but has clearly never done this before because the advice is bad. Again, not coming from a malicious place, but coming from a misinformed one. So make sure the person has achieved what you're trying to achieve or has done something similar, and you or they can connect the success they had to the success you're trying to achieve. So that's number two. Not all advice is equal. Number three is another big one, and that's this, folks. Deserted islands suck. As founders, we're in a lonely role. You've heard that spoken about 1 billion times if you've been a founder for more than 15 minutes. And that's true. But it doesn't need to be that lonely. Join an association. Join a community. Get people who are your peers to bounce ideas off of, to answer questions for, to have a sense of belonging in community. Things that your own team can't be because you're the founder and some things are inappropriate to share. Things that your family and friends can't be because they don't have any point of reference to what you're going through. There, I can virtually guarantee if you live in or near a significant metropolitan area that there will be a local founders or startup ecosystem there. There's also national communities you can join. My friend Trenton Hughes runs an incredible group called Tribe. My friend Eric Harrison, incredible group called Thrive. Either one of those would be excellent choices for you to be a part of. And there are others as well. Those are just two that I know personally. Here in Boston, you've got the Boston Startup Group. You've got the Founders Forum. So again, there's innumerable benefits, but let's just run through a couple of them. Number one, it's good to have that sense of community. Number two, the advice that you get is more likely, using the criteria I shared earlier, to be of value to you. Number three, the networking opportunities, the chance to get to know folks so that when you need a service done, you've got a list of people you can go to that either might be able to provide that service to you themselves or can vet out people who can. And occasionally, the inverse, some of those folks might become your customers. It's just an enormous amount of value. Folks, don't try to go it alone. I'm not saying you won't succeed. I did not take this advice with my first company. I ran it very successfully for 7 years. But I'm telling you, I made it harder than it needed to be by not joining a community. Learn from my mistake and, and don't make it. My final thing before we wrap up today that I want to talk about, and again, what I was hoping would be a nice quick episode, is this. Every day, take a quick beat and reflect on your day, on what you accomplished, what you didn't accomplish, what's left undone, and plan the next day. Why do I say that at the end of my 3 things every startup leader needs to know podcast episode? Because as founders, we will always have more work than we have time. Part of the reason why first-time founders are often working 12 plus days, 6 plus days a week is because there's always more work than there is time. By taking a minute to reflect on what you succeeded with in a day, plan the next day by prioritizing what's left and what has to be done, will allow you to do the things that moves the needle and end the day with a sense of accomplishment. And I'm here to tell you from experience, that sense of accomplishment isn't too far behind the sleep that you're losing by doing the extra work and making you feel good. I'm not suggesting you don't sleep, just saying if you're not gonna, at least accomplish something good. That's all I've got for today, folks. As always, I thank you for sharing some of that very limited time that you have with me. I'd like to ask you, if you haven't already, to check out my book, Destination Employer, on Amazon. 47 raving reviews. I'd love for you to be the 48th. In addition, you can check out the program based on that book at destinationemployer.co. Book a call with me and we can walk through whether that makes sense for your organization. But in the meantime, between now and next week, which will be another interview episode, continue being awesome, continue making awesome things, and continue with your awesome startup.